Welcome to another GCBASIC demonstration. This demonstration is about selecting the assembler. Let me go straight into the slides. GCBASIC supports two external assemblers, MPASM and the PIC-AS XC8 toolchain. You can download those from the URL shown on the screen on SourceForge. Why would you want to do this? Okay, because it's quite important to understand the why. You might want to actually use MPASM or PIC-AS as shown in the table, as opposed to the internal linker GCBASIC, because you have a problem or you want to do some simulation. Let me just rip through. GCBASIC supports all the operating systems, supports all the chips. It's supported by the GCBASIC team, and you can actually debug code inside of MPLAB-X using the hex file. But if you've got a problem or you want to do something else like walk the code, you might need to use a different assembler. And one of those is MPASM. It's basically 32-bit, supports all the old PICs, and it's natively installed by capabilities installed by GCBASIC, but you have to install an installer called MPASM. And the same really goes for PIC-AS. It's 64-bit native, supports all the new chips, fully integrated into MPLAB-X, but you do need to install an external download, a couple of 100 meg. But then you can actually have full support for modern chips inside of MPASM and for debugging and programming and etc. So what I'm going to show you is how to select this inside of the compiler. So obviously a quick picture helps, and essentially what we've got inside of GCBASIC, let me show a pen up there, is going to take we take your source code, we pre-process it, we put it through a code translator. We then assemble that code, just so you know, it produces the actual assembly language file at that point. It links it out to produce a hex file. Great. But sometimes you want to change the linker. In this particular case, using PIC-AS, it could be MPASM. Is at this point here, it produces an assembler language file. Put the pen back on. And then that assembly language file could be pushed into your external linker, and then it will produce the hex. So what we're talking about is changing the linker component. Let me show you. I'll go into, not going to look at the code here. All I'm going to do is compile the code by pushing a function key F6. So I'm in the IDE, push function key F6, and up pops a window and it compiles it. I'm using build 1266. It's not overly important what the version you're using, but I just as a note. So took about 6 and a bit seconds there to essentially compile and assemble that program, and it's using GCBASIC here. GCBASIC is internal. Let's change over to PIC-AS. This is an example. Programmer preferences. Go into Programmer preferences. Select the compiler tab, and in here I'm going to use PIC-AS. Click on that. Press OK, and it will just automatically change it. Now I can compile that by pressing function key F6, sorry. It will do exactly the same with inside of GCBASIC, and then it will pass it to the external. So took 5 seconds here to compile it, passed it out to PIC-AS, and it's added a few more seconds on, but essentially it has produced a hex file. Let me turn it over to MPASM, press function key F4. Let me show it on the screen. Function key F4, programmer preferences. But I'm going to zoom in on that for you. Compiler and take MPASM. And when in here, we're going to look at how that actually is set up as well. So now I'm going to push function key F6 when I'm in the IDE, and it will then pass it out to MPASM. What we're going to do is just develop this. Oh, it says it hasn't found it. Or why hasn't it found it? Because it's not installed in the correct location, and I've done this on purpose. Could not start the assembler. So let's do some figuring out why this has happened, because it couldn't assemble it because it couldn't find MPASM. And if you look on the screen, it says it's in this location, but in actual fact, I put a typo in here. MPASM XX is not installed there. So let me just change that installation. So I'm going to push function key F4 and bring up programmer preferences again. And I'm going to go into another tab called tool variables. And in tool variables, there are two parameters in here that refer to the installation directory of MPASM and PIC-AS respectively. MPASM is this entry here, MPASM location. If I click on it, double click on it, I can correct my spelling because I did that on purpose. It's actually installed in C-column microchip MPASM X, and that is the default location. In terms of a PIC-AS location, it's installed in Program Files Microchip XC8 241 PIC-AS bin. And if they change the version of PIC-AS, I just change that number and I install it. And I take the install location and I paste it in there. Let me press OK. Well, I'm going to come back into there to show you something else as well that will help you when you're trying to figure this out. You should come into Tool Compiler. If you're having a problem, put it in verbose mode. That always helps. I'm going to press function key F6, and it's now giving us a lot more information, and it is compiling it because we'll see it come up. It will pass it up to MPASM in a moment. And it says here, successfully compiled. Why? Because it was assembled. It was assembled using a program, MPASM X. It called it out. It assembled it successfully in 4 seconds. So it's a bit slower, but so what? You have to be quite frank. It's not overly slow. Now, what is different, okay, is that you've got a lot more information in here, and specifically at this particular point here, you can see what it was trying to, how it was trying to call that assembler. And so in here you get a lot more debug as well, but that's not the debug we're interested in this part here. It stores this information in your use.ini file. So in the use.ini, you shouldn't really edit it manually. You should use the preferences editor. But I'm just going to change my preferences, open them up again. Let me just zoom in on that for you and put them back as they were. I'm going to suppress my summary mode, compile my program because it will be faster in actual fact. So hopefully I've shown you that you can use any number of linkers. PIC-AS is exactly the same setup. Use the preferences tool, ensure that your install location matches what's in your setup, and then it will work. Let me take you back to my original side, selecting the assembler. Enjoy.